Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover first the recent aggressions by the Aliyev regime in Artsakh. Secondly, we're going to deal with the invitation that was sent by the Baku regime to the authorities in Stepanakert for direct negotiations. And lastly, we're going to cover the very intense war of words between the Iranian government and the regime in Baku. Let's start with the recent aggressions in Artsakh. A few days ago, Aliyev's gunmen entered and captured illegally a strategic height that is under the control of the Russian peacekeepers. This is near or in, it's very hard to say exactly, the 5-kilometer buffer zone that is under the control of the Russian peacekeepers according to the November 9th, 2020 agreements. In technical military terms, they essentially heroically ran up an empty hill and sat on top of it. There was really no engagement of any kind. Now, why is this relevant? Is because this particular height is about 400 meters above a secondary road that connects the city of Stepanakert with 4 villages that are in the Shushi area that are still under the control of the Artsakh government, and Armenians continue to live there. And by closing this road, or threatening this road, they're actually cut off from it. This road is the same one in which the Aliyev regime murdered 3 police officers in a couple of weeks ago. This has also been used to get some humanitarian supplies into Artsakh to circumvent the illegal blockade. Now, what has been the response of the Russian peacekeepers to this? For a change, they actually clearly stated who the aggressor was in this case, and they outlined it as a violation of the November 9th treaty, and they outlined Azerbaijan as the aggressor. Since then, what has happened is that the Russian peacekeepers have essentially parked themselves right next to where the Azeris are at, above this height. Even though from what we know up until a couple of days ago, this road was not being used to connect to the 4 villages. That could have changed. Right now we have different set of information. The Russian peacekeepers are claiming that they are negotiating with the Aliyev regime for these forces to go back to their original position. I'm very doubtful about that because since 2020, whenever there's ever been an aggression by the Aliyev regime and they've taken any height, this height or that height, they've never left it, and I don't expect that to happen in this case. And, at some point the Russians give up and they get to stay. Now, what does all of this mean? Where does this come from? Essentially, given the fact that in reality, no matter what has happened, the world powers, both West and East, have not punished the Aliyev regime in any way for its illegal blockade. That is obviously taken as a green light by the regime to actually accelerate what it is doing, which is to create a situation to worsen the humanitarian crisis within Artsakh. No gas, no electricity, food supplies running out, to essentially accomplish what its real intentions are, which is a slow bleed ethnic cleansing. So when the road opens one day, all of these people will leave because who wants to live under these conditions? What are we to make of the Russian reaction to this? It's farcical on some levels. You have the Russian state that claims to be fighting fascists in Ukraine. That's one of their supposed reasons for invading Ukraine. But when they actually are up against real fascists in Artsakh, they somehow turn into Swedish social workers. What we really have here is that the people in Artsakh are actually being held hostage in this Russian play. And what is the Russian play here is they obviously want to create conditions where they get to keep their position in Artsakh forever. That's their desired goal. While at the same time, they're in a clear partnership with the regime in Baku, primarily in what is most important is for them, which is to launder their gas and oil out of the country to the West, where they're in a clear business partnership. And the people in Artsakh are actually the victims of this back and forth and this hostage-taking. Let's move on to the second topic of the week, which was the invitation by the Baku regime for the leadership in the Artsakh Republic to go to Baku to have direct negotiations about the future of Artsakh and relations between Artsakh and Baku. The background of this is everyone knows that part of all these different scenarios being negotiated is to have an eventual direct negotiations between these two sides. However, in this case, the Artsakh response is a proper one, and their response is, yes, we're more than willing to talk, but it has to be neutral ground, and it has to be within the framework of an agreed upon agreement. for very clear reasons. In analyzing and trying to understand this, first and foremost, this is a disingenuous fraud. This is an invitation that is designed to get a no, so they can turn around and tell the world community, well, we have no peace partner, we have no one to talk to. In reality, these talks can only be productive, and they can only happen if it's under an internationally agreed upon format, mediated or attended by, at least, by the world powers or some of the world powers that can actually guarantee any kind of an agreement. So the setup of this has to be correct, and these direct negotiations in Baku are just fantasy. They're never going to happen. On another point, there's absolutely nothing guaranteeing the safety of any of the leadership in Stepanakert in going to Baku. And given the criminalized nature of the regime, it is entirely conceivable for some of these people to be arrested under trumped-up charges. And lastly, let's not forget that under current Azeri law, it is actually illegal for an Armenian to actually enter the state of Azerbaijan. Let's move on to the third topic of the week, which is the war of words between the Iranian government and the Aliyev regime. This past week, we've seen very aggressive language from both sides against each other. Some of this is done through direct channels. Some of it is done through social media sites in indirect channels, because there's well-known sites, especially on Twitter, that are well-known to be controlled by state actors. In the case of Iran, by the RGC leadership or people working for them. What has been remarkable about this rhetoric is it's the kind of rhetoric that the Iranian government or state actors have used only in two instances, which was against Saddam Hussein during the long Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, and against the Israeli government, which is a permanent enemy of that country. And some of the language is essentially not referring to Aliyev's country by her name, and essentially calling it the Baku state, not referring to Aliyev by his title, calling him by his first name, putting out very aggressive videos highlighting what will happen if he gets out of line, and the type of military actions that can be taken against his state. All of this war of words was actually joined by some real actions. There were troop movements on the Iranian side, somewhat on the Azeri side, going towards the borders. In particular, Iranian troops were moved to the border with Nakhchivan, which is actually significant. Iranian jets were seen all morning for a couple of days, flying very near the border, back and forth in a menacing fashion. How can we analyze all of this? I think there's essentially, we're looking at three different sources of where this could be coming from. The first one, and I think the most likely one, that this is the continued upscaling of the struggle between this triangle, which is Israel, Aliyev's country, and Iran, because everyone knows that the Israelis use Aliyev state as launching ground for their assassinations, and if any future attacks come in Iran, it's likely to be partially done from Azerbaijan. So obviously, given that these tensions are going up, I think between all of these countries, it is very likely that this is the primary response from the Iranian government. The second one is Armenia, obviously. I think this is a lesser issue. I think it is very clear that Sunni is a red line for the Iranian government. But we need to understand what this means in real terms. It does not mean if Aliyev's forces attack some hillside, someplace in Sunni, the Iranian government is going to respond. But I think if there's any major military incursions in Sunni, they will respond, not because they're in love with us, it's because they're going to be defending their own interests. I think there's also a third element here, which is not very well understood by, especially by the world actors, is that in Iran, and not just in the current leadership, but in fact on some levels in the opposition, and in many ways in the population, the regime in Baku, and in fact the state, are seen as somewhat illegitimate. The Azerbaijan is seen, especially in its current formation, as essentially a stolen Iranian province, or a country that actually steals its name from one of Iran's most important provinces. In conclusion, what we're seeing here is actually a very subtle card game that Aliyev is actually playing, in which he can actually win as long as it does not actually lead to a war. Let's go to the let's go to the scenario if it actually is a war. Any war between Iran and Azerbaijan will end very badly for the Aliyev regime. In fact, the Iranians have a very easy ability by missiles and drones to destroy the few things that are worthwhile destroying in Azerbaijan very quickly without ever crossing the border. In real terms, political terms, in military terms, they can turn that peacock in Baku to a feather duster in a matter of half an hour. But the game that he's playing, short of war, is to actually raise his importance to the West, specifically to the United States and to Israel, who are in this 30, 40-year war with the Iranian government. And this is especially so given the fact that he, at this point, is known to be the main Kremlin proxy in this region. So the only value that you have to the West at this point, given your clear relationships with the Kremlin and your strategic alliance with them, is to play this Iran card. However, this is a very dangerous game to play. One, because you have an unpredictable opponent. And secondly, you're having an unpredictable opponent that is going through internal political crises. And if you know anything about history, one of the way governments deal with their internal political crises is to go to war or to attack a country or a regime that nobody in your own country likes, that you can unify people around the flag in some kind of a short engagement and distract people from internal political issues. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.